Yeah. In 1975, professor actually, I took some courses in master's degree by extension from Wheaton College, but one of my professors was James Engel. And that was in 75 when I took the course, but he published this book in 1975 that was groundbreaking at the time and very significant and very positive at the time, called What's Gone Wrong with the Harvest. Now, he was a communications specialist with a secular background, and he recognizes that the church was totally out of sync with the culture as it was. At that time, a little later than that, a consultant who was also well published, very well thought of, and I learned a lot from Carl George, talked about how the church had become expert in, I don't know what he called it, Western European music, kind of classical music, but was totally out of touch with the music that was understood by the population, particularly the unchurched population in North America. And he wasn't wrong, and Engels wasn't wrong. They were just incomplete and, in my view, very superficial. But a little more than a decade before Engels, Robert Coleman wrote the book that that we're following through on, which I think is a very solid book, an important book, called The Master Plan of Evangelism. I never liked the title, but then I don't like the word evangelism and I don't like the word discipleship. Neither of those words show up in the New Testament. That becomes a shock to people. And I don't know why it should be a shock to people, because if you want to learn about evangelism or discipleship, wouldn't you at least go to a concordance to see what the Bible has to say about it? Now, evangels in the New Testament, disciples in the New Testament, the verb make disciples, the verb form of the word disciple is in the Bible just once. And yet we make a big deal of discipleship, evangelism. Well, for goodness sake, why don't we get back to looking at what was going on? We use the vocabulary of our day, and sometimes it will not look good years from now. We've used male pronouns or male nouns to refer to all people, and we've said mankind, and now we have to say humankind, which was always intended. It was never male kind. It was always humankind. But, words have a slight nuances to their meaning, and they change, and sometimes those meanings are good, and sometimes they're not so good. That's not the point. The point here is, how on earth do we get the job done that Jesus intended for us to do? I guess that's one of the reasons why I go back to 1963 and get under the foundation of I didn't take courses from Coleman, but I did from Engels. And I watched videos from Carl George, and I've been a student of this for many decades. But I knew that we had to get back to basics. That's why previous to this, I went through the training of the 12 by A.B. Bruce, which was written in the 1870s. And I've got another book to come after one or two more lessons out of this book that was written back in the 70s that I think was more foundational and more, I don't know what the right word is, transcends the decades and exhibits for us principles that we need to apply consistently in our world and keep the main things, and develop our strategy based on those main things, not based on what the guy down the street has done or the guy who looks famous over there. One of the things that I've given my life to is the concept of understanding starting churches. And I heard just yesterday, somebody reporting on a podcast on some guy saying, well, you probably shouldn't start a church. I didn't hear that thing myself, so I'm not sure. I bet you shouldn't probably try to start a daughter church until you've got an attendance about 1,000. And that's mind-boggling. How could that possibly fit in the framework of the New Testament? We have, first of all, we don't have the church in development under Jesus' ministry. We have the embryo, we have the patterns, we have the culture, we have the relationships, but we don't have the church. until we get to the book of Acts. So if we get to the book of Acts, where's the church of 1,000? Well, they had 3,000 on the day of Pentecost. Yeah. And they were baptized on one day. Can you imagine the organization of that? We had 12 disciples at that time. And other believers had been 120 in the upper room. And I'm quite sure that there was a lot of organization done by people who were designated as apostles. We'd say, oh, there's a mikveh pool over there. We could baptize there. And isn't there one down on such and such a street? And we could baptize there. So they'd say, come on, you people, I need about 50 of you to come over here. And so on. I imagine that's how it happened. I just have to imagine it. We don't have any history other than 3,000 in one day. But then what did they do? Well, they met in the temple courts day after day. Not all 3,000 of them, obviously, on every day. And they met from house to house. And so we have in the New Testament, because there aren't any church buildings, we have these churches that we would use the term house church, but I don't like using the term because it carries baggage with it. They met where they could meet in probably one of the larger houses. And for example, Paul, finding a place to meet, went next door to the synagogue. They often started in the synagogue and had a little bit of emphasis there, but they quickly hived off of that and went to the lecture hall of one Tyrannus, which was next door to the synagogue. That takes a lot of nerve, doesn't it? And Paul started up some meetings there in a lecture hall. But the size of the church, as it got to its maximum, would probably, from the cultural standpoint, get in that first century to the size of what would fit in a synagogue. And in round terms, the typical synagogue was big enough to hold 100 people at one time. So you can't imagine a church getting bigger than 100. And yet today, I hear that you have to have a church of 1,000 before you can start a daughter church. Who says? Where did we get that from? I know that that's not true. And I know that the great churches that have been started and some that have grown big, and please don't misunderstand me, I'm not fighting against big churches. I'm just saying bigger is not necessarily better. We should not measure by the number of faces we can count, but we should measure by the changed hearts that we can count, because our objective is to move people from where they are to where they need to be, and to, as Paul says in Colossians 1, present every person mature in Christ. Our objective is maturity, and maturity is a lifelong journey, and it doesn't happen in a 13-week discipleship course. I get awfully, I guess irritated is a fair word, but it's more discouraged than I'm not angry with people, but it's just I hear questions like, what's your discipleship pipeline? There's some mechanical way you can move people through a pipeline. I know they don't mean it in that mechanical way, but people come one at a time. And the pipeline for one person is different than the other. It requires careful work with them. Yes, in small groups. Yes, perhaps in large groups. Even in huge groups, if you would. But it happens one person at a time. And it isn't like, okay, we're all at the starting line. Let's do this 13-week course and let's all see who can survive and finish. Okay, that's enough for that rant. I didn't intend to do that long. But it's my perspective on things. But now I want to get back to this whole business of what Coleman uncovered. And I think that he uncovered some things that are really important for us to understand today. Now, the chapter that we've come to, second last chapter in his book, which is not a long book, you should get a copy of it, you should read it, you should consider it. He works really hard at being biblical, 445, if my memory serves me right, references to different scriptures throughout the New Testament. So he saturates his thinking with the scripture. I'm not positive that on every point he captures the exact meaning or the significant exchange that happened from each verse, but he does a whole lot better job than my prof, James Engel, did, who did a sincere job talking about communication methodology and putting the message in the language of the culture in which we find ourselves. So we are working through this whole business of supervising. How do we supervise properly? I did a study recently, and I'm happy to send you a copy of it if you'd like, done by Enhanced Intelligence, on what has gone wrong with the harvest in contemporary terms. And one of the things it said that we're going to get back to before I'm done, if we don't get off on another bunny trail, is this business of how we support people. And the word supervision can sometimes be taken as a kind of a top-down, did you get that report done kind of a thing. But it's so much more than that, and that's what we're going to uncover today. So the one thing we know for sure is that Jesus checked up on his disciples. He kept track of them. He didn't send them out there twisting in the wind. He sent them out, but when they came back, and the evidence would show on several occasions, after he sent them out on their own, not with him, that when they came back, it seems to have been pre-planned that they had a debriefing meeting afterwards. And it was expected that they'd have something to say, something to report. And that's so important for us to understand going forward in how we should be treating people today. And I will get to that in the conclusion. The debriefing session was the classroom. Today, we put students in classrooms. We asked them to write papers. Oh, perish the thought. And I turned into a writer. I didn't do very well on those papers back when I was training. Partly because I think I didn't see the total relevance of the assignments that were given to me, which is more my fault than the professor's fault, I will confess. But then we go from the classroom to the homework, sitting at a computer now. We used to sit at these typewriters back in the day. I'm so old. You had to put white out on the paper and go back over and type over it. Oh, it was tough to type out a paper. And it had to be, 1-inch margins, double spaced, and the footnotes had to be organized in a certain way. And I thought, I don't know where this is relevant in the real world out there on Main Street. At the time, I said, there's something out of sync here. Just like, and this was before I took the master's course with the Engels. I knew that these were good people. These were professors who loved the Lord. And some of them, and the best ones, were involved in local church ministry in an in-depth sense. They didn't just go to the big church and sit in the back row, which a lot of professor types do today. They were actually engaged and working as unpaid pastors in churches, and I guess a few of them were actually full-time pastors. They ended up being the best people because they knew that we had to get this from the classroom to Main Street. For Jesus, there was no classroom in the sense that we think of it today. So why should there be a classroom? Why should we have seminary buildings? Why? I think that's a really important question. Why should we expect that somebody who's going to be qualified to do ministry would get qualified by going and sitting in a classroom, doing papers, and passing exams, and getting marks, and coming out after a very defined pipeline with a degree after their name, and say, there, you're ready to go? It's not what Jesus did. It's not how he raised people. It's not how Paul raised up people. I think we need to give some attention to what we do with that. I know some schools are changing their approach very definitely in regard to actual practical exhibition of the concepts being learned and being taught. So the debriefing that Jesus did was really the classroom. And when they came back, he celebrated with them. He enjoyed it because he had a relationship with these men. And it's like, oh, we do this all the time in life with other people at their level of maturity and readiness. We celebrate the kid who learns how to ride a two-wheel bicycle. He starts with the training wheels, and then we take the training wheels off and we hold the bicycle seat from the back. And then the kid takes off and gets this thing started. And the part I love about that is, oh, you didn't teach him how to stop, because you can't teach him how to stop until you get him started. And so then this fear comes over the child's life. How am I going to get this thing stopped? And some kids actually break their legs getting that bicycle stopped. I think that's a metaphor for the way things are going to work in life. But I don't think any of them that I've heard of actually lost their life over learning to ride a bicycle. But what did they do? They, scraped the dirt off the bruise, maybe put a Band-Aid on the scrape, got back up there and tried again. And probably within a week, they had learned how to wobbling down the road, learn how to ride a bicycle. And, there's this scared parent behind them thinking, but also celebrating that they've had this rite of passage. They learned how to do something that's a really difficult thing to do that most of us, not everybody, but most of us learn to do when we're children. I don't know what I'd do if I wanted to try that as an adult to learn. I'm not even sure I could ride a bicycle anymore. I think I could. My brain can. I don't know if my body can. But I do know that action-oriented thing is what is needed to get people to be good at things. They have to start off by observing someone else doing it and then saying, oh, I can do that. And then they go out and try, and they fall and scrape their knees. It's the way it is. It's the way it's supposed to be. Don't get all upset. And if the kids get upset and say, well, you were a bad trainer because you didn't teach me that I was going to scrape my knee. Couldn't teach you that or how much it would hurt until you actually experienced it. But I could be there supervising and supporting you and helping you understand going forward what needed to be done. Every victory needed some correction. And I really like this one. They were just overwhelmed, these disciples, the 72, when they returned, that, in fact, the demons were paying attention to them. And it's, wow. And Jesus said, don't rejoice over that, but rejoice over the fact that your names are written in heaven. What an incredible statement that is. I remember as a kid growing up, my father referring to the phrase from the book of Revelation and the Lamb's Book of Life. And he talked with his glowing devotion about your name being written in the Lamb's Book of Life. And that's what I wanted, and that's what I accepted. That's what I aspired to as a child. And I stuck by that commitment down through my life. That's been challenging, but I have, because of what was given to me. But, part of what was given to me was my dad took me out on this child evangelism route that he did. And didn't use that term on it, but I don't know what term they had. He had some electronic stuff that he used. It was quite fascinating. It was really high tech for the day. And I remember it was really stressful for him to get home from work at the telephone company and get the car all packed up on a Friday night to go off somewhere 30, 40 miles from where we lived in our 1949 DeSoto with all this stuff packed in the car. But I was in the front seat as an 8-year-old, maybe, going with him. He knew that he needed to show me how. And he did. I got out there in front of people, but he set a pattern going in my life because he took me with him. And I learned to celebrate the fact that I've never had much interaction with demons, or very, very little direct that I'm aware of. But I have had lots of interaction with people. And I have the broken heart over people who say, I'm not interested in getting my name written in the Lamb's Book of Life. Rejoice that your name is written in heaven. And when things get heavy, and they will get heavy, rejoice in the right things, not in the productivity that you might see. So this was a continual pattern of review that Jesus had, and Coleman highlights this. And he would draw practical lessons. Oh, they had a problem. This demon wouldn't respond. This kid didn't get healed. And sometimes Jesus jumped in, apparently. We had only illustrations in the New Testament, so we don't know the whole history. The world would have to be big enough, bigger than it is, to contain the books if everything was written. But we know that sometimes Jesus sent them out on their own. Sometimes he went in front of them, and sometimes he went with them, and always finding the practical lessons for them going forward. When they failed, he didn't fire them. Now that to me, okay, here I go on a rant. There's seldom a reason to fire somebody, seldom. If they are repentant and willing and ready to serve the Lord and humble enough to say, help me. If they're not humble enough to say, help me, then maybe they have to move on. But you still give them the chance to develop the kind of humility that the disciples were forced to gather by their circumstances in following the Master. We have a very significant number of people. If somebody raised their hand once and they didn't take it down right, there's a place for them in service for the Master. Sometimes he said, you guys, you got one loaf of bread and you're worried about what to eat? What is up with you? Don't you remember the feeding of the 5,000? How many baskets? 12 baskets. Oh, you got one basket full of food. You came in with nothing? A little boy with his lunch came and gave, and you ended up with a basket of food. That happened. I did that. I did it once. Oh, do you remember when I fed the 4,000? How many baskets did you gather out of it? 7 baskets afterward. And you're fussing over what you will eat? Sometimes I have to give myself a slap on the face because I don't have enough money to do what I believe I need to do. But I do know that the Lord has always come through in one way or another. Sometimes we've had to rearrange our own personal finances, usually at Wendy's initiative. On that, when she sees that we're hitting a wall, she figures out a way. And we're still here. We're up in our 80s and we're still here and we're still stroking as hard as we can stroke on that bicycle. And sometimes, we don't exactly fall off the bike and kind of get knocked off balance, but we don't scrape our knees anymore. We keep on going because that's what Jesus has built into us and what he wants to build into everybody's life. In this case, Jesus used their own history as the teaching tool. And I think for most of us who serve the Lord, we have to look back and say, remember the time. And how did that work out? So why did I worry? Why did I fret? I did what I could do. I did what I knew to do. And I lived by conviction. And somehow the Lord got me through that trial. He'll get me through the next trial. And he'll get me through this trial. This whole business of learning patience in regard to serving in the ministry is so critical. 85% of people who start down the road of serving in ministry don't get to retirement age. Now, I probably said to you before, I don't believe in retirement. I don't even know what that word means because I don't want to give up the stuff that makes me alive and it's important to me. Yeah, there are some aspects of things I have to go slower and maybe I'd like to see a few more places in the world than I'm ever going to get to see. But that's not what I live for. I live for what Jesus has called me to, and I'm trying to do my very best to understand that and have the discernment of that. And that requires a patience that is not by any means innate with me. I am by nature a very impatient person. I do better at it than I used to, but I'm not perfect. The disciples, in one incident, they said, let's just bomb them to death. Let's bomb them. We'll send in the B-52s and we'll teach them a lesson. And Jesus, you don't know what you're saying. You don't even know where that's coming from, implying it was coming from the devil himself. And he showed them a better way. So they were off track. He took action to put them back on track over and over again. So when we look at how we should apply that in our world today, I don't want to bring down any seminary buildings. Or I don't want us to stop any online courses. I don't want to major on minors. And I think it's just too easy to major on minors. And keeping the main thing, we're going to disagree on some stuff. And you go your way, I'll go my way. And I hope that we can get together and have coffee, but we may not be able to work arm in arm because we have different viewpoints on strategy or theology or whatever. But it doesn't mean we can't be nice and we can't be honorable with other people. Okay, and tell them the truth, but don't try to destroy them with what we believe to be the truth. We've got to have a perspective that says there needs to be on-the-job training. I have a theory that over here, at any one time or stretched out maybe over a lifetime, the issue ought to be what I call 4x4. Everybody should be able to strive towards, it's a concept, not a number, strive towards raising up and supporting and supervising for others. Fading in, fading out, maybe 3 to 5 years of the intense phase, and then maybe even only an annual contact after that for life. But staying with people, and 50% roughly are going to drop out, and they're going to blame it all on you. Get over it. People they love to blame people. Most of the car accidents in the world were the fault of the other person. Have you ever noticed that? It was the other person. That pedestrian just jumped out in front of me, or what could I do but run over him? It's like, well, there may be more information on this thing. Oh, so you were texting on your phone and the pedestrian was texting on their phone and walked down in front of you, huh? Well, it's a lot of information comes out in the court of law, doesn't it? Well, the courts of heaven will sort out all this stuff. We've got to do the best we can do. And all of Jesus' teaching through his ministry was going to land firmly in the New Testament. And it did, and they followed through. But we see the evidence that Jesus never let him coast. He never let him just kind of hide and sing, how blessed we are. Oh, sing another worship song. Let's do that chorus all over again. It's so much more than that which stirs us with a dopamine rush into our brain. And the dopamine receptors in your brain are diminishing 7% a year over the decades, 7% a decade over the span of your life. That means that the things that made you happy last decade are going to make you 93% as happy this decade. There's a whole lesson on that you need to understand. You have to drive it by what you're committed to, not by what makes you feel right and feel good in the moment. And that doesn't mean you lose your enthusiasm for what is right. You stay with it. I heard just this week that one of the men that I looked up to that actually stirred me to do some writing, and I knew a man who did some of his writing, kind of the ghost writing in the background for him. He's in his 90s, I think 93, and he's still teaching in a seminary. I want to be like that when I grow up. Give me that mountain. I want to be all that I can be as long as I can be all that I can be and do all that I can do. And if I can live to 100, wonderful. I hope to. I really don't honestly expect to, but I do by all the mathematics of things. Expect to live into my 90s. I made it to my 80s. Only 5% of the population in my country makes it into their 80s. So I'm in this elite group that survived this long. And I'm doing pretty well. And no, not perfectly and so on. And I will keep going as long as I can in whatever way I can. And I hope that in an initiative like doing this video, it will be of support and help to other people. We've still got to win the whole world. It is the making disciples is in all the nations of the world. We still can only move forward, not by the dopamine hit in our brain, because somebody figured out how to identify one of the well over 60 different endorphins that run around in our brain, created all that, way beyond my pay grade. That's okay for me if somebody wants to understand it. I don't want to understand a whole lot more than I do understand on that. What I want to do is have the power of the Spirit of God stirring me from the inside out so that it spreads to you, who spreads it to others. That's what's really important going forward. And sometimes people will quit. But you'll notice in the life of Jesus that the coach never left the team. He was always there, no matter how bad they were. And they, don't you get it yet? He said sometimes. And they were slow. But the Spirit kept on working. And Jesus said, look, when I go away, I'm going to send an advocate for you. And we got you covered going forward. It's so important that we apply the principle properly today. Principles, all of the principles. And one of the key ones is don't send workers out without a support system, which has been done. It was done with me. I've watched other people. And then when somebody fails, we just rip them out of our Rolodex. Does anybody even have a Rolodex anymore? We just forget them and throw them away. Well, they might resist following up, and some do. And not much you can do about that when you follow up. But it is important that we don't allow failure to be an option without people coming alongside and supporting. Everybody who works in ministry needs somebody to debrief with about how they're doing. Very few have that, but everybody needs that. It's not an optional concept. It's the plan according to Jesus. And we have to keep the vision clear. Too many workers get discouraged and there's nobody there. And we know by observation that when activity doesn't have this external concern, that it kind of stalls out and fails and people give up and say, what's the point? And often somebody who is a promising leader, some rough edges, because all of us start with rough edges, and many of the rough edges continue all the way down through life. They get discouraged, and we lose some of our leaders because we don't stay with them. So if we think about this, we've got deployed workers. Yeah, okay, that's fine. They're good. No, they need support, or some of them will quit. In fact, most of them will quit if they don't have a support system. That should be obvious looking at history. You look at your own personal networking and say, oh, so-and-so, I don't know where they ended up. They used to be the pastor at this church, and then something happened, and I've lost track. Well, go and find the track of that person that's on your mind. You don't have to do it with everybody. Just a few. I suggest 4 over a lifetime if that's what it takes. We've got people who are not yet deployed. We've got people who are deployed and they're doing well. We've got people who had a bad season, and now they're, as my metaphor is, they're restocking the shelves at Walmart. And then because they're faithful people, just in general terms, they get the job of supervising the storeroom. And eventually they get to be the manager at Walmart. And have you ever checked what a manager at Walmart gets? Big bucks. And so they settle. They just settle. And what a terrible thing that is, that somebody who should be deployed in ministry settles for something less. And they say, well, I am a deacon in the church. Well, if that's where God wants you, then stay there by all means. But often it's people who need external help. The biblical example is Paul, struggling, trying to figure it out. Who came alongside him? Barnabas. Without Barnabas being his advocate, Paul never would have been Paul. Saul never would have become Paul in our mind. So we have, these formerly deployed workers that may be redeployable. We have the in-development workers, and that takes a lot of interest and supervision going forward. So what are we going to do? I want you to think about who you can support. Supervision may be too loaded of a word, too strong of a word, too regimented of a word. Who can you support? Who can you help? What can you do? Who's out there that you see coming up that's a teenager and And there's so much the teenagers, you see this 14-year-old kid and you say, you know what? Maybe God has his finger on you to serve him. And if he calls you to work in ministry, never stoop to be a king. Never stoop to be the manager of that Walmart, because you'll get the greatest blessing out of your life and be the greatest blessing in the world if you, in fact, put your life in service for him. But not everybody will get a paycheck to do that. Most won't get a full-time paycheck to do that. And they certainly, might get a subsistence level paycheck to do that, but they won't do well financially, but they will do well personally, and they will achieve eternal results. Resist social loafing. Just go look that term up. You got to get my book, Still Meaning, to understand how much social loafing, 35 forces that are at work in one degree or another in all of our lives to slow us down from doing what we meant to do. And social loafing is, well, it's not my job. It's the other guy's job. It's the denomination's job. It's, well, what happened to that? Whatever, that church planting director, what happened to that regional? What guy was supposed to lead that small group in our local association of churches? You be that person. You jump in. Figure out what you can do to make a difference. Failing is not the problem. Failing to try is the sin. And it really is. If you know to do good, according to James, and you don't do it, that for you is sin. So name it and then reframe it and fix it and get back in the game and see what you can do to become all that God wants you to become in serving him. I hope that you'll pass this along to some other people. Hit the subscribe button. If you send a comment, I might see it, I might not. But by all means, pass it along to someone else. Sit down with them and say, can I sit down with you for an hour and watch this together and see what strikes you and see if you think he's as crazy as some people do. You know, Mark Twain, who was famous for many quotes, and one of them, I think this is pretty close to accurate. The person with a new idea is a crank until the idea succeeds. And the idea of serving Jesus and building his church is one that must succeed. And you and I both have a part to play.